Not a lot of people rush home to watch local public access TV. Still, it's been a cornerstone of cable for decades, televising civic meetings, school sports, and providing a soapbox for political rants. But now a proposed FCC rule could put public access out of business. For decades, cable TV companies have been forced to fund local public access channels through monthly fees paid by subscribers.
It's about $5, and that is basically all helping to support Westwood Media Center in our operation.
In fact, Westwood Media Center is just one of about 200 Massachusetts local public access operations benefiting from those fees.
Local access stations use this money to provide municipalities local television programming, coverage of government meetings. It also allows residents access to video production equipment, educational classes, and common meeting spaces.
But that may end if a new FCC rule goes into place. Consumers will still pay the monthly fee, but cable companies could use that money to offset other expenses, like free cable drops at schools and municipal buildings.
If a town values having cable access, they're going to have to shift the responsibility for paying for the service to taxpayers.
And that's exactly what should happen, say supporters of the new law, who contend cable subscribers should not be bearing the burden of a government service, a service that is forced on some communities and one that could easily shift from cable to online. Then again, opinion shows might disappear.
Local access is a jumping point for a lot of alternative media sources. Shows that have been critical of this administration.
Right. Which might be another reason the FCC would like to see it go away. So, Dan, you've written about this extensively, and I support the idea that that's how I got my start. I started in local community access, so I'd like to see it stay. I think the funding model is broken, that the burden of this should not fall strictly on cable subscribers. A universe getting smaller and smaller and smaller because it's actually available to anybody with a streaming device or anything like that. What's wrong with shifting the burden of this or shifting it to an online only?
Well, what's wrong with this is that you're essentially cutting off the source of funds overnight at a time when the public access operations are slowly trying to make the transition.
Well, they haven't said what the timeline is on this at all.
Quick.
But yeah, it's going to be pretty quick. The funding model is doomed. There's no question about it because more and more people are cutting the cord and going strictly to online. But one of the people I interviewed was Susan Fleischman, the head of community access in Cambridge, and she said that everything they've tried to do to try to shift the funding model, 75% of their funds still comes from the cable companies. So this has to take place more slowly instead of just being cut off. At a time, too, when local newspapers are shriveling up, there's very few other places to get this kind of local information.
I completely agree. I had a meeting with someone who runs a public access system, and he was telling me that for years now he has been thinking of, what other model could work. And one of the things they've landed on is looking at sort of splitting or having kind of a private-public partnership where you can focus on production services. And they're finding that's helpful in generating some additional income.
Pay to go in there and use the...
Exactly. But it's very difficult once you're marrying the public and the private, you have to do things like have a separate entrance, make sure the tax, it's very convoluted. But they have really put a lot of thought and effort into moving in that direction, understanding that funding really is drying up. And when you do depend on such a large chunk coming through these funnels, then you cut that off and it's history for a lot of these systems. What I will say is you pointed out the importance of cable access, public access. It really is. When I was visiting there were a couple of young people who came in. They were returning cameras that they had checked out to use to go out and cover some stories in their communities. At the same time, what was running was, what I would consider a pretty boring, mundane meeting that had taken place in the town. And he was pointing out to me, news crews come in and cover stories in the town when it's a big breaking news story. They get 5 minutes of it and then they run out and put the best together, and that's what you see. But there's a lot that's lost unless, if you really care, you can sit back and watch how everybody feels about it. And I think that will be lost.
But it's about the money. It's you're punishing cable subscribers.
Right. Well, you do have to come up with the money, and I do agree that it is in a system that appears to be fair, but at the same time, yanking it, even if it's not quickly or overnight, even if it's over 2 years or whatever, it's still going to be so drastic that a lot of these cable access companies that have systems that have depended on this for so long will not be able to find other revenue sources in that period of time.
I think it's not only to the loss of this hyper-local programming, it's also the loss, I think net cable companies should look at this and say, look, we have places in these communities that are good for us. They're meeting places. They're places where people interact with us as a company. And the other thing is, I worked in cable for many years. You mentioned you started a community access. Do you know this is the AAA system for cable companies? People get their starts there. They work there. So I think that maybe they're a little short-sighted and they're cutting their own throats by saying we're taking away this infrastructure that is supplying us in the end. So I think they're losing something there.
Well, it is about the money. I'm very connected to the Cambridge Access Television, of which Susan Fleischman is the president. I know how much content, local content, is there. But I have an immature response to this, really emotional response, which is I am a cable subscriber, mad about the kind of fees that I have to pay, but I'm mad also that if I have to pay the fees to get to cable, then I don't want to hear these companies saying, I don't want to give up $5 to local cable. Give me a break. I can't get out of paying for sports, then you pay for the local access.
That's right.
That's how I feel.
You're still going to have to pay the fee, but it's going to offset all these other drops and stuff. That's the thing.
I mean, I just think that there should be something. Mike has given a more, constructive way of trying to deal with it. But there should be something for my fee to keep me from being angry every month that I pay this cable fee.
Why can't municipalities support some of this?
Well, they could, but it's tax money, isn't it? I mean, they can barely support their schools and police departments.
And will they have to hold fundraisers like public TV does?
They probably
will. Well, they already do that.
Yeah,
they're doing that
that
now.
Yeah.
I mean, I go every year to the one for CCTV, which is very popular. And you see the number of people who are there.
The one in Cambridge is very active.
And before we go out, we should disclose that Callie and I are both honorary board members of the Cambridge system.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay.